Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Team CASA, I, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, founder of CASA, on behalf of all of us, welcome you to this very important webinar on shifting geopolitical sands, options for India. Sir Winston Churchill defined Russia as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. His words in 1939 spoke eloquently to the Western sense of Moscow as the other, an inscrutable and menacing land that plays by its own rules, usually to the detriment of those who choose more open regulations and a democratic polity. Churchill's prescient words are worth recalling today as Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its 53rd day with no end in sight, and the fragile world order seems to be in a flux. Some opinion makers are already drawing their conclusions about how this will end and what would be the outcome. Not to be outdone, Team CASA too has been debating this, especially in the last 2 weeks or so, when there was a flurry of top-level visitors to India, including the Russian foreign minister, following close on the heels of his Chinese counterpart. Last week also saw the Indo-US partnership climb up yet another notch to another level of engagement with the 2+2 dialogue taking place in Washington under the benign gaze of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, despite the vastly different points of views of the conflict and a strong disagreement on the outright condemnation of Russia. Where does India go from here and what are our options going forward are the oft-asked questions. The fallout of this war, whenever it ends, is being hotly debated, especially on its implications for the Indo-Pacific and for India's relationship with Russia, China, and the rest of the West. To do some serious crystal gazing, we have with us this evening a very erudite panel of speakers as well as a moderator, all from very different backgrounds and all looking at the same conundrum. Our first speaker of the day is Dr. Happymon Jacob, who is an associate professor of diplomacy and disarmament at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament in the School of International Studies, JNU. Prior to joining JNU in 2008, Dr. Jacob held teaching positions at the University of Jammu and the Jamia Millia Islamia in New Delhi. His areas of specialization are arms control and disarmament, as well as India's foreign policy. He has a number of peer-reviewed books and publications to his name, including Conflict in Kashmir and Insurgency with Long Roots, and the India-Pakistan peace process. Welcome to this webinar, Professor. We look forward to hearing your no-holds-barred views. Our next speaker was supposed to be Mr. Praveen Swami, who could not be with us today and had to pull out due to some personal reasons. We are, however, fortunate to have with us Mr. Jayanta Ghoshal, who is a consulting editor of India Today Aaj Group. He has over 40 years of journalistic experience, including 35 of covering foreign policy and security issues. He is based both in Delhi and Kolkata. Earlier, he was editor of ABP in Delhi. Mr. Ghoshal is a prolific writer, having authored several books in Bengali and English. He's an accredited journalist to the United Nations and has covered various meets like SAARC, BRICS, G20, apart from the UNGA itself. Widely traveled both internationally and within the country, he is media faculty in Adamas University, Kolkata. He is a teacher, speaker, and a political commentator. We thank you, Mr. Ghoshal, to have kindly accepted our last-minute invitation, and we look forward to hearing your views on the shifting geopolitical sands. Our third speaker on this webinar is Mr. Anil Trigunayat, IFS. He has served in the Indian missions in Côte d'Ivoire, Bangladesh, Mongolia, US, Russia, Sweden, Nigeria, Libya, and Jordan. In the Ministry of External Affairs, he's worked in the Economic, West Asia, North Africa, and Consular divisions. He's also served as Director General Joint Secretary for the Gulf and Hajj divisions. Thereafter, he worked as Deputy Chief of Mission in the rank of Ambassador in the Embassy of India, Moscow. Prior to his superannuation in May 2016, he served as Ambassador of India to Jordan and Libya and High Commissioner to Malta. The ambassador has studied Russian history, culture, and language at JNU and is best placed to give us his views. We welcome Mr. Trigunayat to this webinar and look forward to what he has to say on what India's options are. The moderator for this event is Lieutenant General Satish Dua, PVSM, UYSM, SMVSM. General Dua retired as a Chief of Integrated Defense Staff. The Integrated Defense Staff is responsible, this is for those who are not aware, for synergizing the capability development, perspective planning, jointness amongst the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. He is a counter-terrorism specialist and was Corps Commander in Kashmir in 2015-16. The tumultuous years marked largely by the surgical strikes in response to the terror attack at Uri and controlling the huge unrest in the valley post-elimination of the notorious Hizbul Mujahideen terrorist leader Burhan Wani. He commanded his battalion as well as his brigade in active militancy in J&K on the line of control. As Major General, he raised and commanded a new counter-terrorism division of the Assam Rifles to coordinate operation in the 3 states of the Northeast. The General has also been a commando instructor as a captain and the Indian Defense Attaché in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as a colonel. He has also held important appointments in the Army headquarters dealing with capital and revenue procurement of weapons and equipment. He has co-chaired the Indo-US Military Cooperation Group and steered the construction of the National War Memorial. He writes and speaks on current and strategic affairs. He is a member of the Executive Council on Global Counter-Terrorism Council. He has authored a book about soldiers' lives on the line of control titled India's Brave Hearts, which also has a Hindi translation, Bharat Ke Janbaz. A TEDx speaker and a motivation speaker for the youth fora and corporate leadership talks. The General is a keen sportsman, fond of horse riding and adventure sports enthusiast, to include skydiving, skiing, parachute jumping, and mountain biking. So without further ado, I hand over to General Satish Dua for the rest of the proceedings. Thank you. Over to you, General Dua.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And let me begin by wishing everyone a happy Easter Sunday. It's a good and auspicious note to start on. This is a weekend. This is a very festive, long weekend that we are just ending. The Lent is on, the Ramzans are on, Navratris are just over. Baisakhi, Vishu, in so many states we are beginning the new year, new beginnings. So coming to the topic, this war, Russia-Ukraine war, is an unexpected war with unexpected lessons and unexpected effects on the global order. Now, why do I say that? If you take your mind back to nearly 2 months ago, the general conventional wisdom was that the war won't take place. Russia is just saber-rattling. They've achieved their aim. Now the NATO would not admit Ukraine, and so on and so forth. But it happened. And it happened with a ferocity that the conventional wisdom said in 21st century, no country will be allowed to change international borders. There won't be World War type of invasions, at least, and so on and so forth. Kinetic wars are passé. Now we are going to be relying more on cyber and tech, etc. And that is the reason why I say unexpected lessons. A lot of unexpected military lessons are being drawn. While when an operation is still in progress, it's wrong to draw out lessons, but it's been nearly 2 months. So trend lines have started emerging. And unexpected effect on the global order. It's a war that's happening in one corner of the world, but it is set, and there is almost no disagreement on that. It is set to change the world order. What was decided in Versailles in 1919 after First World War was sort of redefined after 1945 at Yalta. Yalta, of course, now is nearly in the war zone. And now is the time we are perhaps looking at redefining the world order. And that's where our esteemed panelists will come in. We are looking at redefining the world order. So from Versailles to Yalta to, in lighter vein, maybe the meeting is held online in keeping with the trends to decide the new world order. Be that as it may, the purpose of today's discussion here is to talk about the shifting global sands, how this dynamic is playing out, who are the losers and who are the gainers, or likely so. But that in general in particularly or with a focus on how India is gaining in importance. General Murthy brought out how a string of dignitaries have actually made a beeline, if I may use that term a little loosely, to India in the last 1 month or so. And the British Prime Minister is coming on the 21st again. So it's still and counting. So why is India so important? Or why has it gained in importance? Is it because of our economic growth? Is it because of a steady economic growth? Is it because of our location, a strategic location at the one end of the Indo-Pacific? Is it because India is the only country that has actually pushed back against China more than once, and China is a cause of concern for the world, US included? So, having said this, I am now looking forward to handing over to the panelists, and I'm going to let's restructure this. Let's structure our discussions in this manner. Maybe everyone can take about 5 minutes for their opening comments. In the order General Murthy has already said, we'll start with Happy Moon, then Jayant, and then Anil. But 5 minutes for your opening remarks. It may be extended if you feel very strongly, but certainly at 7 minutes, after having given you a signal at 5, at 7, I will then remind you that's over. I'm a the military people will understand. I've been cadet sergeant major in both the NDA and IMA, and I've been an adjutant in my battalion and a commando instructor that General Murthy read out, so I can enforce discipline in light of it. The idea is that we stick to time and we don't go astray. When I say astray, because in the second round, we are then going to, everyone is going to be posed 2 questions, one major question and one side question. And then request you for your answers on that particular question. And so you all are aware of what you have to handle. May I call upon Happy to please begin, set the ball rolling, and your time starts now.
Thank you, General Dua. Thank you, General Murthy, for this kind invitation, and congratulations to CASA for organizing this seminar at a very, at a very uncertain time. We don't know where things are heading and how things will sort of turn out in a few months' time. But I think it is important that we have this discussion. So the war in Ukraine is obviously still unfolding. So therefore, it is not easy to make any predictions at this point of time on how this is going to end. I think, and yet, however, I think it is possible to sort of visualize some short, medium, and long-term implications that this war might have on Asian geopolitics in general and on India in particular. In the short run, of course, New Delhi has decided to be neutral in the Russian war in Ukraine, although there is an identifiable pro-Russia tilt in the Indian sort of neutrality or stance, as it were. While India refused to condemn Russia, it has also strengthened its engagement with its partners from the opposing camp, be it the Americans, the Australians, the Japanese, Germans. As you correctly pointed out, General Dua, we've been sort of courted by just about everyone in the international system. I must also sort of point out that India's tilt towards Russia is not an unqualified one. I mean, all you need to take a look at is the various notes of explanation for the Indian vote at the UNSC and UNGA. The various joint statements that India has put out recently. The recent one with Prime Minister Kishida during his visit last month. It basically talks about the importance of international law, the fact that one should not invade another country. All of these things are mentioned without, of course, taking Russia by name. So this, I think, there is no more a talk of the legitimate interests like we probably did in 2014. Then NSA made that statement. They're talking about both Russia and Ukraine. But I think this India's unease is quite clear about it, and this unease, I think, is going to increase over time. In the short run, I think New Delhi has played its cards extremely well. But in the longer run, it's going to be harder for India to balance the various difficulties that are going to come its way. Let me look at some of the potential implications as it were. I think one implication, in my opinion, is going to be a stronger China. Right, a weaker Russia at the end of the war is going to mean, in the Asian parlance, a stronger China. China will also continue to consolidate its political and diplomatic grip on the region. On the positive side, of course, the lesson, in my opinion, that Chinese are learning is that the Russians, so the Americans and the West, are probably not going to take any bullying by China lying down, just the way they did not take the bullying by Russia lying down. So to that extent, it's probably going to have a deterrence effect on the Chinese future behavior. But I think we are probably looking at a great deal of Chinese diplomatic activities in the region in the wake of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. You basically saw the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi making a trip of the South Asian region. He first went to Pakistan, Afghanistan, then to India for half a day, and then went to Nepal, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for 2 days. China has also, by the way, not really condemned, so not really given all-out support to the Russians. It refused to vote against, just like India did. It didn't really sort of vote against Russia. That's basically what. There is no evidence that I can see so far that China has provided any military help or military hardware to Russia, despite the fact that Russians are not having a great time on the battlefield, as it were. So the point that I was trying to make earlier, which is China is using the current great power vacuum in Afghanistan and the region, because the international community is diverted elsewhere, to reach out to Taliban and to ensure that its interests in the country and in the region are sort of taken care of. So this, in my opinion, means that this could further shrink. The more China's sort of influence and power grows in the region, this could potentially shrink India's influence and power in the region. India's at the moment at a diplomatic high, but I think this could potentially end up becoming difficult for India over time. The second, I think, implication really is that the United States and West might go easy on China and the Indo-Pacific over time, because obviously they are focused elsewhere. And I think, I mean, I'm also hearing reports that they probably might reach out to China to eventually broker a deal between the warring factions there. So this has troubled the Japanese, the Australians, Indians, the fact that the West might shift its focus from China and the Indo-Pacific. So you're seeing a lot of activity in New Delhi, and we also have the May Quad summit coming up. The third impact really is that some of the regional conflicts could be forgotten. You have several conflicts in the South region.
Wrap up?
We have several sort of conflicts in the South Asian region. For example, the one in Myanmar or the one in Afghanistan. But there is very little focus on some of these conflicts. There is no focus on Sri Lanka, for that matter, right? So a lack of focus particularly on Afghanistan, could mean two things. One, it will give a free pass to Pakistan and China, and perhaps in future even to Russia to some extent, and obviously to Iran, cutting India probably out of the equation there. And secondly, without external assistance and access to Afghanistan's money in foreign banks, the ability of the Taliban government to rule the country, even in a half-decent manner, is going to be very difficult. So you're looking at the attention being diverted by the international community, and that's going to have impact on regional conflict. My final point is this, and this is going to be a provocative point, General Dua. A strong China in the region over time could potentially mean that India may have to relax some of its strategic autonomy, as it were. Let me put that argument very simply to you, and that is, the more China grows stronger after the war in the South Asian region, the more it is going to sort of encroach into India's traditional sphere of influence, and of course also the power of China is going to be concerning for India. This will mean India will get more close to the United States and its allies in the Indo-Pacific region, right? So that would mean India will have to make concessions or compromises when it comes to its own strategic autonomy. But on the positive side, this could mean that India will now focus a lot more on some of its clear strategic interests, namely the Indo-Pacific or Quad, among others. With that, I will leave it at that. General Dua, thank you so much.
Thank you, Happy. Thank you very much for a very concise and a very focused intervention. And thank you for sticking exactly to the time. Interesting points there. Like you said, of course, that a weaker Russia will mean a stronger China, and a stronger China is something that may not bode well for India's strategic autonomy. It may just push us towards the US. I actually have a red herring. One of my articles written earlier this week was published yesterday in the Quint, and I'm going to use that on this towards the end. I'm just going to talk about a thought that I published in that, in line with what you were talking. All right. Thank you, Happy. And without much ado, I am going to turn to Jayanta for his intervention for 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Dua. Thank you, Mr. Murthy. At the outset, I thank all panelists also. At the outset, I want to say first one thing, that the sovereign interest is the ultimate interest of any country, we know. And it is very difficult to make the foreign policy in this global political system to remain neutral and keep our own sovereign interest intact. The basic problem is that Americans' interest to bring us as much as they can. They will be the happiest country if we can be the member of NATO, perhaps, in this critical juncture. The Russia, the President Putin, obviously their interest to bring India as much as they can. But in this situation, in this black and white foreign policy situation, the India's position till today, it's a challenge. And our sovereign interest is to protect our geostrategic priorities. And I think saying Russia's invasion, Russia's attack, we don't support, that is crystal clear that we are not supporting. Whether this foreign policy is, there is a tilt toward Russia, that gray area is there, I admit. But it's a very Hobson choice. You know, if we today, if we take a position that we are condemning the war, and in this new balance of power, now we are supporting the American and the European decision to condemn Russia's invasion. We are condemning the invasion, but we are not disconnecting our old diplomatic tie with Russia. So it's a very diplomatic and critical positioning, and that is the diplomacy. The either or situation is a more, because you know the military solution is the ultimate solution, whether it's extended foreign policy as Art of War said. But you know, when you are in diplomacy, the gray area is sometimes more important than the black and white situation. Number one, our first interest is China's role in this whole situation. If we condemn Russia's role and if we disconnect our diplomacy with Russia for this Ukraine war, then what will be the fate of our relationship with China? This China-India relationship, this Sino-Indian relationship, is a very complicated, it's a very multi-layered relationship. And this is not happy hours with China. In spite of that, I think the antagonism is not only the solution with our relationship with China. And as I think Chinese foreign minister is coming here. As a journalist for the last 40 years, I'm accustomed with the foreign heads visit to Delhi, especially in winter. Jokingly, we used to say that we used to compare with the Siberian birds. And that all those visits then Agra Taj Mahal visit with family, photo op. We, the journalists, we used to see those visits. But in this summer, so many head of the states, I think only the Israel Prime Minister, that was also for his health issue. He could not come. But several head of the state, and especially in China, what is the importance of India today? That all these head of the states in this Ukraine war time, why they are coming? Why they are? China is also testing the water. The BRICS summit is coming. China is inviting Prime Minister. China wanted to meet Prime Minister this time, so politely Prime Minister declined. But he met NSA, he met Foreign Minister, and they wanted to know our position. So what is the importance of our today's foreign policy approach that all the countries, they want to know? And in spite of our position, US, they have taken a strategic patience also. In spite of this position, they have strategic position. We are not against Ukraine also. So I want to conclude now only to saying this, that it's a very critical juncture, but I think that India's position, this is the most pragmatic, most realistic approach. And always it's a critical situation, and it's a more challenges ahead. I don't know what will be the fate of the world, but what are the other options India has today? I think this is the best option what India has taken over on this issue. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Jayanta. That was very well covered. And I recall you telling me in a private conversation before this webinar, he said that I'm a writer. When I start speaking, then sometime I get carried away. So, but thank you very much for sticking absolutely to the time. You were very conscious. Very good point being made. Some of it was made by Happy Man also, saying that India's interest is more in China's role. And also that we have to see that what is going to be the outcome. That means we have to keep our channel of communication open with Russia so that we can engage with China. I mean, very slightly different, but the importance of China in our paradigm was made by the first speaker, Dr. Happyman also, and good points being made here. And but I'm tempted, Jayanta, to ask you a slightly different question when I ask you the question, just to discuss pros and cons. Thank you. Now for the last speaker, the opening remarks from Mr. Anil Traganayat.
Very good evening, General Dua, General Murthy, for having me, and great pleasure being with this esteemed panel. We have seen something which is very interesting, that none of the superpowers in the past 30-40 years have been able to win a single war, except probably India, if you count now 1971. So this should not be lost out on the people. Recently, we had seen that Russian foreign minister, and before that, Putin himself had said it, and he said here that this war, Ukraine war, was meant to stop US global domination. This domination is built on gross violations of international law. The fact remains that USA talks of the international law. It is not a part of the UNCLOS. It speaks of international maritime law order in the Indo-Pacific. It does not respect that. It talks of war criminality. It is not a member of the ICC. It uses every single international institution, whether it is UN Security Council or anything else, as an instrument of its foreign policy. We have seen what happened to all the multilateral institutions during the reign of Comrade Trump. So I think that is something very important one to see. And thirdly, I would say that we have to see the behavior of other powers when we are looking at the Russian aggression. Forget about justification. No war is justified. At least invasion is not at all. I mean, Russians cannot be condoned for invading Ukraine. That is very simple. But at the same time, what have the Americans done in the last 20 years? Look at Iraq. I was ambassador to Libya. I have seen what happened there, what has happened in Yemen, Syria. These are manufactured wars. And the millions and millions and multiple times of what is happening in Ukraine has happened there. This is an information warfare as well. So whatever you listen to will not be 90% correct. It's very likely. And we see all kinds of conflicting reports. And there are journalists in this group as well. So this whole thing has been changing from 1979 onwards. We have seen. And these changes have had a far-reaching consequences in the evolving global order. So India's position, if it is there, that is essentially on the basis of a holistic approach and a considered view. Very often, a lot of people talk fondly about doing a tightrope walking. It is not a tightrope walk. It is a principled stance, and that Mr. Ghoshal said, and Happy also said the same thing, that you have to look at your national interest first. That is your primary concern. And national interest is not going to be served because this war, prolongation of this war, is impacting on the economy, which is barely coming out with pandemic, apart from the global cases. So I believe that this is an extremely important point to see. Today, what we are seeing, and this is the continuation of the might is right, the jungle Raj, my way or highway. These are the kind of things that are happening. Russia is trying to become a status quo power or maintain the pretense of a power. So I believe that these game of narratives and disinformation cannot allow us to look at a foreign policy perspective from a merely public domain. And one of the important things that I would like to say people should remember, and that is that with this war, or even before this, we have seen Germany and Japan abdicating their neutrality, kind of a thing that was imposed upon them after the Second World War II. In Europe, we are looking at rightist, ultra-right groups coming into power everywhere. What will be the fate of that in a few years' time needs to be watched very carefully. And these disputes over international behavior, interpretation of international law, questions of the world order, all rules militate against, frankly, the ideational approaches that these countries or everybody else has taken. And we are seeing it on a daily basis, what is happening. So just 2 minutes that I have is that India, what is the position? I have been arguing for it. I mean, General Dua, you also mentioned that India's geostrategic location, near suzerainty over Indian Ocean, second largest country population-wise, and will become first in the world by 2035. Second largest market, fastest growing major economy despite the pandemic, resolved to be a part of global value supply chains, trillions of dollars in opportunity, largest democracy in the world, and a strong leadership, which is an advantage. We look at it historically. Pandit Nehru was there. We shown when we were very weak. Even at that time, we were very active on the international stage. We had the non-alignment policy that was going on. Mrs. Gandhi, 1971. Prime Minister Modi today is exerting himself. And that is what indicates why all the leaders are coming to you and asking for advice, or India be on this side or that side. The fact is that since we abstained on the matter of principle, for diplomacy, for dialogue, for territorial integrity, for sovereignty, that's why people are coming. And today, in my own discussions with a lot of people, I say that they want some third option, not to be part of either or, as the Cold War 2.0 ensues. And here is an opportunity for India to lead the nations for strategic autonomy, NSA. Thank you.
Very well covered, Anil. That's really very precise, very concise. The sense that I got from first half of your intervention was that you spoke about a couple of examples. Let's take one. US talks of international law, but is not signatory to UNCLOS. Actually, you sort of pointed out a couple of places where the Americans showed duplicity. I mean, between their behavior and what they practice or they preach. And a good point that you brought out about information warfare. Nothing new. We all know about it, but the fact remains we tend to forget that things are not exactly as they seem to us by watching these TV channels or reading the media or the reports that we're getting, because we are getting mostly one-sided. We're getting what the Western media generally propounds, because the Russian side news we're not getting. We would have been happier if we really got a lot of objective Russian point of view of the progress of war also. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for this Very nice opening remarks. And now I'm going to, lightly speaking, I'm going to put you on a spot. I am going to ask you to take a position, just for the purpose of discussion. So let me start. Let's begin only with that order, in the order that we spoke. Happy first, happy Easter to you. And we start with the question for you is, now, India is gaining importance. We talk about it. But India is also has been aligned, well, aligned maybe slightly strong, but we have not voted against Russia. I think 11 or 12 votings we have in the UN, we have abstained. We are not opposing them. We are doing case to case on a case to case basis. While we have agreed to a probe for the Bucha killings, but we have had good relations with both sides. That is, and managed to evacuate more than 20,000 of our nationals from Ukraine, which is no mean feat. In that backdrop, India is not opposing Russia. How could you, for us, lay out, Happy, as to what are the pros and cons of our going with Russia throughout? And sort of keep aligned. We've already heard everyone talk about, we all know, this informed audience knows that how India has everything from Russia's table as far as defense needs are concerned, up as much as 70%. But that may not be the only thing. And a side question that I have for you. If we have such goodwill with Russia, we also need goodwill with Russia to, as Anil also mentioned, Jayant mentioned, we need that goodwill with Russia to keep, to help us in our Indo-China dynamics, because they are going to be closer. Now, the side question to you is, how do we leverage this goodwill with Russia, if we have it, in the India-China dynamics? Over to you.
Thank you, General. I'll be very quick. I understand you're probably giving me less than 2 minutes, so I'll be very quick.
Five. Total 5 minutes for both.
Oh, fantastic. So that gives me adequate time to sort of explain my argument. So let me put it this way. I think so far, as I said earlier, so far India has played its cards quite well. We've seen the recent visit of so many of our interlocutors to Delhi. From the Japanese to Australians, and I think some of them are actually quite understanding of the Indian plight. The Australian High Commissioner in Delhi made a statement that the Quad understands the situation that India is in and appreciates the position that India is taking. There was no adverse remark when Kishida, Japanese Prime Minister, visited Delhi. So I think there is a certain amount of understanding in the international system. The Americans and the Westerners in general do not seem to be all that understanding, or at least they are not sort of saying it publicly. Maybe they don't want to hurt the Ukrainians in that sense. But I think the reason why India, in my opinion, is taking this somewhat a tilt towards Russia, as it were, as I have written earlier on, I think India is faced with a continental and maritime dilemma, right? There is a continental dilemma on the one hand, and there is a maritime dilemma on the other. Now, when it comes to the continental dilemma, which is you have China, you have Afghanistan, you have Pakistan, you have Iran, you have the entire Central Asia, which you can't access directly. You have to go all the way through Iran to Central Asia. So in that kind of a continental dilemma, you tell me there isn't a single power that can come to India's help apart from Russia. So you need the entire, you have to have friends in the entire continental stretch, and that is only Russia. So the Westerners, because the Americans have moved out of Afghanistan and they are probably increasingly moving out of the West Asian sort of landscape, Central Asia, they were nowhere to be seen. So you need friends, number one. Number two, okay, we don't help Russia. Then what happens? I don't imagine that Russia is going to come helping India tomorrow when the Chinese tell the Russians don't help Indians. I mean, I don't imagine that the Russians will choose us over the Chinese. But the reality is that we don't want another unfriendly country in an otherwise unfriendly region, which is Russia. So if we don't sort of at least be neutral towards them, they will be unfriendly towards us, which is not going to be good for us. Now, the consequences, of course, are if it doesn't end anytime soon, India is going to face increased pressure from the West. The S-400 waiver, for example, it hasn't yet come through. The sanctions on defense cooperation with Moscow that India has defense cooperation with Moscow in the Central Asian republics. There could be sanctions on that. We are selling BrahMos missiles to various countries. Recently, there was to Philippines, for example. The many other countries, Vietnamese and Indonesians, wanted. The sanctions could actually create problems in that direction. And generally, having an unhappy West is probably not a great idea as far as India's strategic outlook is concerned. Coming to the second question very quickly, and I'll be very quick about my answer to that. I think, if we sort of continue like this with the Russians, with this kind of support to the Russians, let's say indirect support to the Russians or tilt towards the Russians, I think there are some leverages that we have. Number one, the fact of the matter is that while the war is still going on, and it's going, in my opinion, is going to go on for a considerable period of time, the Russians would not want China hitting up the LAC. So in other words, put that differently, it is possible that the Ukraine war may prompt Moscow to stabilize India-China relations in a very strange way. Because if the Chinese heat up the LAC, then India is going to turn to the West for some help, logistical, diplomatic, political, etc., etc. And that's not going to be good for the Russians. And therefore, it is in Russia's interest to make sure that the Chinese do not heat up the LAC while all of this is happening. But I think in the longer run, that's not how it's going to play out. In the longer run, when the Chinese realize that the Russians are willy-nilly supporting the Indians, they're probably going to sort of tell the Russians choose between Indians or the Chinese. And I think in the final analysis, the Russians may have to, because the Russians will be opposed to Russia, a much weakened Russia will be beholden to China more than ever before. So there is only so much India can probably make use of that. But a very side point, that is, but my 10-second point, India may also want to use this opportunity to court the Russians to enhance its own, importance in the Afghan chessboard, as it were. With that, I will sort of leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Happen. Very good points being made. Are you mentioned about US largely is more understanding of our position than it allows or sort of states. But it remains to be seen whether we will attract sanctions under CAATSA, because they haven't said yes, they haven't said no. You keep hearing both kind of conflicting statements coming out, and that may be one big thing. But you're right, and it's interesting to hear you talk about how Russia might be interested in easing out our tensions, and that's what you said in the continental versus maritime domain. So that our continental friend will be our asset in this case. So that remains to be seen. Thank you very much. Okay, turning to the next speaker, Jayanta Ghoshal, I am going to put you on a spot. Should India continue sitting on the fence? We are being accused of sitting on the fence. Should India continue to sit on the fence, or should we bite the bullet, go with the US and the West? There are several advantages to be gleaned from that side also. So, I mean, even if you don't believe in that, because that's the sense I got from your intervention, opening remarks earlier. But if you can lay out for us, what are the pros and cons of going with the US and the West, as it were? And a small side question to you: if we have that kind of goodwill with the West, with the US specifically, how do we leverage it in our dynamics, that India-Pakistan dynamics? Over to you.
Thank you, sir, Dr. Jayant. Actually, I liked the Dr. Jacob's deliberation, just what he has given me the framework of this Indo-China relationship. In that context, what should be our approach to Russia? And he ended with this issue of Afghanistan also. So now I just want to add 2-3 things. Number one, as a student of international relations, I remember, actually today I was remembering our textbook, Frankel's book, that desire and effective desire, the foreign policy should be the actualization of the effective desire, because we have desire that we should be NAM, non-aligned country. That is a theoretical position. But case to case, we have to change our position because we have to evaluate the geostrategic position, lot of several factors. Now, this China stand on Russia, Imran Khan visit to Russia, what happened to Imran Khan, that is a different story altogether today. But you know, I think our approach to Russia, not only in the context of Ukraine, this now the Afghanistan issue, what we thought that it was a major problem and it is a disaster, it's a lamentable situation. But now, today, I can say, as a journalist, I'm working on the ground zero. I am covering this Indian government's actions. Moscow envoy and the Russian government organized meeting with our national security advisors team, with the Taliban, and now I can see in the YouTube that Afghanistan minister is showing wheat of Pakistan and India and saying this is the Indian wheat and it's better, and the Afghan people, they want this. And now that danger of Afghanistan, India, that Taliban, because Taliban is also coalition, and there is a Haqqani group and non-Haqqani group, pro-Pakistan, anti-Pakistan, and Pakistan's economic situation, Afghan-Pakistan relations, even China is also realizing that China-Afghanistan relations, what should be, what should not be. Because China is also, they have a lot of internal issues, internal threats, even on terrorism also. So it's not a very oversimplified foreign policy resolutions that we will be anti-India, we will be pro-Russia, we will be, this because, you know, when we were a student, this post-Cold War time, the new word polycentrism started. And now the world is polycentric, but new order of balance of power again trying to emerge. But I think the old spirit of NAM through polycentrism, again, India is in that mode. And from the journalist, I'm telling you this, when Myanmar, Bangladesh, both neighbors on Rohingya issue, there is a conflict, but how India handled? I mean, we are the best friend of Bangladesh, but we had to handle the Myanmar. When the junta government was there and the Suchi was there, there are complicated layers. But now in this situation, I think that how long the war will be on, that is a major challenge, especially in this post-corona, this economic disaster is there, and the role of, I mean, the other economic issues in our domestic issues are also always related to the foreign policy. And sometimes the domestic issues, unfortunately, in our electoral politics, it controls. But I think in this situation, Pakistan, India, certainly there is an opportunity. I will take only 1 minute. That the opportunity has come because there is a prudent strategy of India to connect with the army. And it's not a track 2, track 3, track 4, it's a track 1 actually. And this, you see this, when Imran Khan resigned, what was the reaction of the army of Pakistan? They were in favor of talk. Now the new prime minister, what he said on India today, actually it's a lead story in Indian newspaper. So I think this opportunity, because war is not the solution. War is a consequence when we failed in foreign policy. So this opportunity, I think, India-Pakistan peace process, there is a extreme possibility, and Prime Minister also tweeted. So I think always there is a hope against hope. When it is a completely zero, so 1 can be greater than 0. That's it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Jayant. But you hit the second question very well. But I'm still looking for answers for the first one, very frankly. Can you take a minute if you want to, or take it later?
Yeah, sure.
What are the advantages that can come our way if we were to align with the US or the West? So maybe you can cover it in the now.
No, actually, we are not going against the Americans. And the last meeting with the Washington, actually, it was fruitful. And the strategic patience the Americans are showing, and especially on the oil issue also, how our foreign minister handled, what was his statement,
Yes,
how US reacted. These are the actually all, everything is on record. So I think if we can take oil from Iran in spite of US and the
absolutely.
Israel's position, and without not harming our relationship with Israel, and what Bajpayee voted for Iran, Modi voted for Iran, Manmohan Singh voted for Iran. So it's a consistent foreign policy. So I think on this issue also, US, Russia, we can follow the consistent Indian foreign policy. We should not see in the prism of political party ideologies. Thank you.
I think you're right. Our diplomacy has really matured. Today, maybe it's because of a professional at the helm of affairs, but overall, that also must be helping. But overall, I think diplomacy has really matured. India is taking very nimble-footed and adroit diplomatic decisions. And let me turn now to the diplomat on this panel. We continue to exercise our strategic autonomy. I mean, what Jayanta just mentioned, we all know, the whole country, the whole world was so excited by the statement Mr. Jaishankar made in that press conference when he spoke about looking at Europe for oil rather than India, etc. In one of the channels that described, I think we are following that policy, which I heard in one of the channels called policy of India first. I think that's a very good phrase that I've been picking up, that India first, and that's our national interest comes first, and we are being pragmatic. I remember decades ago when we took a very moral high ground as far as Myanmar military rule, junta was concerned, and we lost out, and we don't have to expand the discussion to that. We lost out because of a moral high ground. So we are being pragmatic in the interest of our country. So the question to you is, well, you have already spoken about it. So would you, Anil, say that this is what we need to follow? And the side question, which is a little more important in your question, is World War II, at the end of World War II, spelled the death knell of League of Nations. And the UN was formed. Today, we are seeing increasingly over the last recent years, and also especially during the actions during this war, the UN is becoming more and more ineffective. It is also the case that we have a claimer. India is amongst those who aspires to get into a driving seat in the UN Security Council. Maybe other countries like Japan, Brazil, and more can also be included. So the fact of the matter is, today's UN perhaps is not truly representative of the today's world community. It is outdated. So now that this is refashioning is taking place, do you think there is a case for UN to be sort of reordered, not just modified, reordered, and call it UN 2.0 or whatever? Your take on this?
Well, for the first question, I still maintain somehow. You know, the problem is, and I have served in USA, I have served in Russia, and I have been to China very often. I was there last 2 years ago for a West Asia forum, for which I was the only non-Arab, non-West Asian person to be invited. And I had a discussion even with Wang Yi on this. The fact is, the moment you start talking from the position of strength, then the world listens to you.
Yes.
And since India has arrived today, we don't have to worry about what is Americans looking for. They are looking for condemnation of Russia for no rhyme or reason. It serves nobody's purpose. No one. The Western countries are doing exactly what they want to do. They are buying oil from him, $1 billion a day. It's going into their coffers. But we are not looking at it from a point of view of our own interests. We have to. That's what precisely we are doing. Now, when I'm talking about this, I mean, you can look at it optimist that the world will settle down once again, or you can look at it with pessimist, which a diplomat should not. But at the same time, I feel that there is a very great likelihood of a new Cold War 2.0 coming up, which will be far, far more stringent than the Cold War 1.0, because this will be always charged on things that we have not yet seen. We are looking at an alternate financial architecture developing, which is going to be a major challenge for India and for countries in the world. So in this situation, if you take sides, you are stuck. And as was mentioned earlier about the continental and maritime dilemma of India, At the end of the day, and you are generals, you know it very well that India will have to fight its own wars. Otherwise, you have seen what has happened to Ukraine. Do you want to become a Ukraine by going with the Americans or going with the Russians? You have to extract the maximum mileage. That's what the realists should do.
True.
And I think this is precisely what we are trying to do, in my view. We are having our strategic autonomy on a principle-based approach, and alignments and bilateral relationships, trilaterals, plurilaterals, whichever way it works. We are part of the Quad, we are part of the BRICS, we are part of the RIC, and we are part of the JAI or whatever it is. And that is working very well. And we have seen it in this recent times only, that despite whatever India's stance is, whatever the public outcry is, we are seeing that the leaderships in those countries understand. As for the second one, I hope there is no World War III. And so we are not looking for another new organization. Of course, UN failed. UNSC failed for the simple reason because these 5 P5 countries don't want any reforms. They continue to remain with the mindset of victor and vanquished. They don't want any reforms in the system. And that's why nothing is happening, and this becomes a talking shop for everybody else. But it needs to be empowered. It needs to be reformed. If it happens, probably something will come out of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists. Let me just throw it open for questions.
We're open for questions, Satish?
Yes.
Right, great. We have a whole lot of questions, but let me queue on with one question, and maybe all panelists can take a minute or two to answer on this. Generally, the trend line which has come out from all the panelists is that we need to have a centrist approach, which is India first, as per our national interests, not necessarily swing to USA with Russia or China. And we have a history of being able to balance relationships and powers out. And that's India. That's what we are, right? But then, let me we have a strategic partnership with USA and a special strategic partnership with Russia at the same time. And we have some kind of adversarial relationship with China, despite the fact that our trade relations have been growing. Okay, it's a very interesting. In this question which is posed, and that's why I've given this bit of a background, is why should India try to actively improve relations and seek alliance with the US instead of China, especially when US has a history of being a fair weather ally, and an alliance with China would resolve the border problems and probably improve relations with Pakistan, and also considering that US is a declining power, right? And that has to be seen in the overall context that we are a rising power, right? I think this is a holistic kind of a question. It'll set all other questions in the wrap. So I think, Satish, if you permit, we can ask Happy Mohan to start tee off.
Yeah, please start. Happy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, General Shankar, for that very provocative question, as it were. Why is that we can't be friends with China? I think that's a fundamental, foundational question in many ways. I think the answer lies in the fact that this is simple geography. It's a structural factor, number one. Number two, it is not as if India has not tried being friends with the Chinese. I mean, after the Lopno tests, the Chinese conducted their nuclear weapon test in 1960s. India took such a long time to develop its own nuclear weapons, 1998. One could make the argument 74, India tried to sort of make a peaceful nuclear explosion, etc., etc. But for a very long time, India did not balance the Chinese power, meaning we basically told them we are happy to be friends through the 90s, through the 2000s, to the 2010s. The two economies were collaborating, the trade was happening. India wasn't actively going into the American sort of led alliance, as it were. I mean, even now we are in that, we are not in that alliance. But the closeness that we have with the Americans and the West today was not there, say about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But has that made the Chinese rethink their strategy towards India? No, a relationship or friendship has to happen two ways. I don't think the Chinese have really attempted to be genuinely friends with the Indians. One. Number two, as I said, the simple geography part. any rising power would, and it's a rising superpower, would want its own region to be subservient to that. Obviously, the Canada-US example doesn't count here for a variety of other historical reasons. But even though they have fought wars in the past, it's a different matter. But in the India-China context, simple geography, you have a rising superpower here, which wants every other power in the region to be secondary to that power. Indians do not want to accept that. So friendship hasn't worked, and the structural constraint is sort of kicking in, where the Chinese want India to play second fiddle, which India, I don't think we would want to sort of do that. That's my simple answer to you, General Shankar.
Thanks.
Right.
Jayant?
Would you like to speak anything on this, Mr. Anil?
Well, I think that Happyman has put it very correctly. I mean,
Right.
I feel that the problem with China is, I mean, we'll continue to have the economic engagement with China for a long time. There is nothing going to, because China owns up large value and supply chains. The whole world has to continue to trade with it. India has remained, it has given fitting reply where it is needed. It has stayed eyeball to eyeball with them all through. Now they understand that India cannot be taken for granted. But at the same time, India has not gone ahead with the US containment strategy in the Indo-Pacific openly. I mean, that is why we are continuing to have the dialogue and diplomacy. But let us not fool ourselves. China's basic policy, as has been mentioned also, is essentially to keep India contained within South Asia. And there also they are going ahead with their string of pearls strategy and all this, because they consider that India is the only country that can be some kind of, can fill that power vacuum with them eventually. Right now, they are 5 times our size, 5 times our economy and everything that is there. Right? USA may be a declining power, but at the same time, you need technology. And when they are ready to give it to you, to come up to that level, and that is legally, not illegally, and like the Chinese and others have done it. So I think in that sense, it's very important. It's good to have, India wishes to have good relations with every country, whoever wants to, without superimposing their will on you, as far as the foreign policy is to be conducted. So that's what I'll say, that China will remain a factor in everything, and it's a problem for you.
That's a good point being made as to, helping India to get our technology. I mentioned to Happyman when he spoke in his initial remarks, I mentioned one of my pieces that was published in the Quint yesterday, and I just threw a wild card sort of thought, an outlier thought there in that, saying that it is in US interest to help India attain self-reliance, to help us move towards Atmanirbharta in defense needs. Only then we will be able to take very objective and independent stand and decisions. And I mean, rather than say that, okay, we should not buy Russian equipment and we should buy the American, then that's only changing us from one dependency to another. Actually, what the US should worry about, and this is the outlier thought I wish to be bold enough to inject over here. What India should actually be, what US should be worried perhaps is, what if India and China improve their relations? They are old civilizations. We only have a border problem, essentially. And there is a formula of Arunachal versus Aksai Chin lurking beneath the surface. What if that is done and India and China, these two giants, align? I know it's not very likely given our dispensation and all that. I'm just oversimplifying things, but the fact remains that this is another thought that the world should think about. And the next question that I have is somewhat in this line. This is by an anonymous attendee. So why should India try to actively improve relations and seek alliance with the US instead of China, when the former, that is US, has a history of being a fair weather ally? An alliance with China would resolve the border problem and probably improve relations with Pakistan, and the US is clearly a declining power, whereas China is a rising power. Can I go first to Jayant for this question, and then anyone else who may?
I think the best possible solution on this issue is to explore. That is the ideal foreign policy situation, to explore our relationship simultaneously with China and US. It is accepting all the fault lines with China. If we can try to explore that, then showing our relationship with China, we can have the diplomatic bargaining power with Americans, and showing our bilateral relationship with US, trade, not only trade and the other defense issues in general, then we can have a good relationship with China. That is the diplomatic balance. And that is the spirit of Atmanirbhar and whatever you are saying, you have written on the technology issue also. I mean, if US is concerned with our issues, they have to respect our, the modern technology, software, all issues will come. And India, I am not comparing India, China, but India has a huge market and China has a business economic interest, and they are very pragmatic on that. They are holding our border talks, not like Pakistan, with all economic activities it is on. So I think that is the best possible solution. But we should not be ally of US, but we should not be hostile to China also. But you know, our government was not against our relationship with China. The government tried also, but the recent development have actually disturbed the relationship. And I don't know what will be the Chinese long-term strategy on that in the Himalayan front, and what is the, because you know, Professor Jacob was saying, that China's interest in Russia, there is a short-term and long-term also. If Putin actually is a failed in this Ukraine war, what will be the interest of China? What will be the, if Russia's victory is there, then what will be the interest of China? So it's interrelated. So we should not go either of. We should explore, and that is the present position. And I don't know what will be the fate of our future, near future. That I cannot forecast. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jayanta. And before
I have a question.
Before I read out the next question, and this question is addressed to Happyman. But before that, I want to talk about Mr. Anil Trignath has actually written, I think it is yesterday that you wrote an article about West symbolizing, and yeah. Okay, so that's you've already spoken about that point of view here, and it was interesting to read your article as well. The next question is from Darshan Gajar. It is the good evening, General Dua and esteemed panelists. My question is to Professor Jacob. As you've already mentioned that one of the implications of Russian invasion is stronger China in the region. My question is, what does this mean for global world order? Do you perceive a global order dominated by China, or a multipolar world order dominated by multiple states, including India? Something what was spoken of just recently.
Thank you, Darshan. I think I'll be very quick about it given the paucity of time. But you know, my own reflection is that China is going to be the dominant power in the Asian region. There is no taking away from that fact. Of course, you have India there, you have Japan, the two Asian powers who are going to challenge the Chinese power, especially in the oceanic space. In the oceanic space, there will be a lot more challenges to the Chinese power. You have Quad, you have the Indo-Pacific, under the rubric of the Indo-Pacific, a lot more powers coming together, the Australians, the Americans, UK, France, etc. But in the continental sphere, the Chinese are going to be overbearing. There's no question about that. There is no one to check the Chinese in the continental sphere. Having said that, I think the rise of China as a great power in the region and as a superpower in the international system will lead it to, my own feeling is that at least for a considerable period of time, an accommodation by the West. I mean, look at the trade figures between every country in the West with that of China, even Japan for that matter. India only has, for example, something like $18 billion trade with the Japanese. And the Japanese have $125 billion trade with the Chinese. So every country you look at, their trade figures with the Chinese are so humongous that they can't really afford to push China out of any of these leading sort of international forums. China, on the other hand, will also try, and for a very long time, China tried to sort of hide and bide, and now only it's starting to assert. I don't think China is going to go the Russia way and sort of rock the apple cart. They're going to sort of go easy, and over time, eventually, they will ask for more and more accommodation from the West and from the Americans, and eventually they will be able to sort of put their foot down when it comes to some of the global commons, as it were. Now, what impact will that have on India? It will have a lot of impact on India depending on, well, I think the impact on India is going to depend on how India is going to react to it. Now, in certain cases, for example, on the question of climate, on the question of trade, India is probably going to work with the Chinese. On the question of security and defense, India is probably not going to work with the Chinese. We are going to work with the Americans and the other like-minded partners. So I think as many of the other panelists have pointed out, it's a time for smart diplomacy. You got to think big, you got to think long, and see how this multi-alignment can be taken forward. There is no one single answer, I think, to the dilemma that we are faced with at this point of time.
Thanks, Harpan.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, and I have a question from one of our CASA members, Manoj Chanan, Colonel Chanan.
Satish, can I interject and ask a question?
All right. I'll just read this question out. I'll just read this question.
Okay, yeah.
And since I just started, India is seen as a balance, and this question is a bit repetitive, as one of our members asking. India is seen as a balance in the conflict between Russia, NATO, and the US. At this point, my question to the panelists is that should we not remain independent, not seem to be in any camp? The world is changing to a multipolar world. Should we not claim our stake as one of the major powers to contain China in the region? A very slightly nuanced difference. After this, we'll have General Shankar's question as the last question.
No, I'll enlarge on this itself so that
all right. Okay.
Right?
Then
I think
we'll take it together.
We'll take it together.
Yes.
I'm in fact I'm going to dilate on what Chanan has said.
Right.
See, we are talking of shifting global sands. Right. I'll get back to the core of our today evening's discussion. Very clearly, today the world has three poles: Russia, China, and USA. And okay, the fourth pole, if you take EU also into consideration. And India is the fifth pole, whether we like it or not, because most of us Indians like to underplay ourselves, and we don't have the strategic confidence as to talk ourselves as a pole. In all this which is happening, it is not only the Ukraine war, but we also seem to forget that we've gone through 2 years of the pandemic. And the 2 years of the pandemic and this Ukraine war have changed the world in many ways than what it was in 2019. Right? And to that extent, India is in a different track altogether. There's no other country which is a $1 trillion plus economy going at 7% interest, GDP growth. So we are a pole in many issues. And more than that, India is being seen as an alternative to China in terms of scale and capability, right? Increasingly, you see this dislocation. Just to give you a view, the Apple factory is majorly relocating to India. They're not doing it just for fun. So in this kind of a context, you also have to see the other side where we've all spoken. Maybe a little bit of a devil's advocate is required. We've all spoken of China as a rising superpower. Is it so? It's an aging superpower, right? And it's losing trade. Its economy is going through problems, right? And COVID has just hit it. And it's 2 years down the line, you're going to see where China is going to exit. So I don't know whether we have to see China as that kind of a superpower, the way we have so far seen it in the past 5 to 7 years. There is also a view that China has peaked. I've given you this long preamble to see in this kind of a thing, where do you see India? Where do you think we need to stand in the world order? I'm not talking of in a camp. I'm talking of a world order. Anyone can take this on.
Yeah. Could we start with you, Anil?
Yeah. Actually, I have already talked about it.
Yes.
Yeah, he has. Yeah, I agree with you.
And that we need to be our own pole. That's it. We don't need to be in any camp because we have that particular strength and both moral, diplomatic, and the actual physical strength on the ground that a country needs to become a power. The only thing is we have to get out of this hesitation mindset and always thinking that what the others will say, what the others will do, because you got to bite the bullet. Like even in this particular scenario, I've been from day one saying that once we have evacuated our 20,000 people, and it was absolutely essential to do so, you need all the countries on the ground where your people are there to be able to evacuate, because diplomats are not Superman. You require the local government's help to get your people out. So it was important for us to take that stand at the time. But once your people are out, then you should be far more active in creating some kind of, we seem to be really moving towards achieving peace, like the Israelis are trying, Turkish are doing, others are doing. So one should be on the feet and moving around, except talking. So this is how we need to get away from that hesitation. America, everybody will respect you. And I have, as I said, that we have that strength in us and we need to do that. And if we don't do that, then obviously nobody else going to do that. As far as China is concerned, I'm not intimidated by China. But at the same time, facts are facts. What Chinese have done since 1980, when we had the identical GDPs, and from then on to now, 20 years, where have they reached and where have we come? So we still have a 5-time differential. It'll be difficult to, and plus their engagement in the West. You see, the Americans, we are saying our trade went by $125 billion, the highest ever during the time when we were trying to contain it. The United States, their trade deficit has increased by $396 billion. Despite the Americans continuing with this Sino-US trade war. So it is everywhere. One more point, lastly, I would like to just say about Russia. You see, Russia, even down and out, is not out. The best thing in scenario would have been if the Americans and Russians had found a modus vivendi. It would have checked, which is what everybody wanted, but did not happen. As far as Russia's perspective towards India and China is concerned, in the global geopolitics, Russia looked at China to leverage it. In order to leverage China, Russia looks at India. So we have to try to look at it from that point of view. That's a big window that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anil. Would any of you gentlemen want to care to comment?
Very quickly, perhaps, 30 seconds. I think by the time the Americans realized that the Chinese state is becoming a major challenge for the Americans in the international system, I think it was a bit late. And even today, I think the recognition is a bit patchy. As Ambassador Anil pointed out, there should have been some sort of a great power equation between the Russians and the Americans, and they should have actually dealt with the real threat in the international system, which is the Chinese state, as it were. I mean, it's a predatory state. It is a state that is hell-bent on making sure that everyone else sort of orbits around it. So I have no doubt in my mind that China is a future challenge and threat to India. So what do we do? I think smart balancing is the answer. There's no one country that is that we can sort of go to and be a part of its alliance, etc. I think we need several of those countries, and I think we are probably in the right direction. We have the Americans for what the Americans can do for us. We have the Japanese, for example, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, in sort of trying to get the smaller countries in the region together against the Chinese influence. In some sense, we have the French very strongly in the Indo-Pacific region, a very, very strong navy, as it were. The UK, for example, many of these countries are still sort of uneasy about facing up to the Chinese challenge. I think they will have to take that lead and sort of lead the way in some ways, because we are next to China. The Americans are not, the French are not, the UK is not, Germans are not, we are. So I think we have a special responsibility to look after our own interests. But thank you so much, General Dua.
And thank you, Happy, for 2 counts. First, for being a crisp answer, and secondly, you actually summed it up. I couldn't have put it better. To really brought that out very well. Shifting global sands, as General Shankar also sort of reminded us, shifting global sands actually requires us to be nimble. Indian defense policy, our political and diplomatic stands have to be nimble. Adroit diplomacy is really called for, because this is the moment when things are likely to be redefined. And with the changes which go way, way beyond just a war in Europe, it is going to affect all of us. I think we need to watch carefully and act very maturely in the days ahead. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all our esteemed panelists. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to the viewers for your patience. Thank you, Kasa, for this, for General Shankar and General Murthy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, General Dua.
Thank you.
Thank you. Undoubtedly, this shifting of geopolitical sands is the most important discussion of the post-COVID world. Has the Russia-China partnership crossed an irreversible threshold? Has our relationship with the US too reached a new high? Can we continue to bank on Russia's neutrality as we move closer to Washington? Is India's stand today the same as it was from the 50s? That is a non-aligned one, but is it a non-aligned 2.0? What I'd call a non-aligned on steroids. After hearing the views of our erudite speakers as well as of our seasoned moderator, I suppose we need to mull on these issues brought about. The weeks and months ahead will be very interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Anil Trigunayat, Mr. Jayanta Ghoshal, Professor Happy Mohan Jacob, General Satish Dua, General Shankar, Team CASA, and above all, thank you all the participants who spared your valuable time on a Sunday evening to attend this webinar. Thank you all very much. Goodbye and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Thank you.